Hey. 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 It's time to wake up. It's time to face another day. And it's Tuesday. And we know what that means. It's time for another episode of the Tell Me Something Good podcast. So, get your coffee going. Get your AirPods in and tie your shoes for your morning run or your evening walk. Turn up the volume in your car on your commute or your computer at the office. However you prefer to listen, let's do this.
Welcome to the Tell Me Something Good podcast. Ranked by the International Association of Awesome Podcasts as the best podcast in the history of podcasts. Wait, is that a thing? I don't think that's a thing. Anyway, seeking to shine a light on all that is good in an ever-darkening world of negativity. Here's your host, Clint Swindall.
Hey everybody, I'm Clint Swindall, and this is the Tell Me Something Good podcast, the show that is all about creating a more positive world by overcoming negativity. It is my goal each episode to engage your mind, encourage your heart, or enlighten your soul. I am happy you're here. This is episode number 15 of the Tell Me Something Good podcast, brought to you by a brand new sponsor, Nutty Foods, a family-owned and operated company striving to provide healthier snack options, ones that are approved by moms and loved by kids. Look, we all like a good snack, and we need some snacks that are actually good for us, and Nutty Foods provides just that. They are the home of Chocolata, these crazy good chocolate spreads. They make their products in small batches, and they're dedicated to providing the healthiest and most delicious chocolate spreads available. If you're looking for a healthy, keto-friendly snack option for you and your family, check them out at nuttyfoods.com. Several years ago, my father-in-law drove from his home in Illinois to our home in Texas. I remember asking my wife why her dad would drive instead of just flying. She said he likes to drive. He finds it to be calming and a great time to think. I know a lot of people like that. And while I like things that are calming and I like quality time to think, you will not find me driving across the country when I could just get on a plane. I find driving exhausting. I don't even like to drive to the airport. But I digress. Where was I? Oh, that's right. My father-in-law. We'll call him Ed, which is handy because that's his name. Ed drove from Illinois to Texas. It was a 16-hour drive. The morning after his arrival, he walked into my office and asked this question: do we learn more from our successes or more from our failures? My first thought was, you spent way too much time in the car. You really should find a car game to keep you occupied. Some I Spy with My Little Eye or the license plate game or something. After giving it a quick thought, I responded by saying I assumed we learned more from our successes. After all, most people spend an enormous amount of effort trying to be successful. In fact, those who are highly driven spend an inordinate amount of time beating themselves up for failure. However, the question he posed was, do we learn more from our successes or more from our failures? In many ways, we don't learn much from our successes at all. Sure, our successes are an affirmation that what we thought was true really was. But while we're breaking our arm, patting ourselves on our own back, in the end, we really haven't learned much. It could be argued that we don't learn much at all from our successes because there is less chance we'll try something new that could make us even better in the future. If that is the case, failure is much more valuable when it comes to learning, which certainly is something good. American philosopher John Dewey once said, "Failure is instructive. The person who really thinks learns quite as much from his failures as from his successes." So there you go, Ed. There's the answer to your question. The key word in his quote is thinks. We really have two choices when we fail. One, we can beat ourselves up for getting something wrong. Or two, we can dissect our failures to find the real lessons. As with everything in life, it all comes down to a choice. There is no arguing that success is better than failure. People who succeed get promoted. People who succeed get raises in pay and bonuses. People who succeed are admired. We all aspire to be successful, and that should always be the target. After all, people who fail get demoted. People who fail lose their jobs, and people who fail are criticized and ridiculed. No matter how hard we try, we're going to fail from time to time. Everyone fails. In fact, at some point, you are going to suffer through some monumental failures if you haven't already. That's just reality. Now, some people may say, well, that's not a very positive thing to say on a podcast about positivity. Never forget that Tell Me Something Good is not about rose-colored glasses thinking. Tell Me Something Good is about staying focused on the good stuff, not ignoring the bad stuff or pretending it doesn't exist. While I'm an optimist, I'm also a realist, and the realist in me recognizes we'll all experience failure. Let's commit to learning from our failures. Let's figure out why it occurred and avoid repeating the failure. And most importantly, let's spend less time justifying why it happened and more time determining what lessons can be learned. In the end, failure is only failure when we fail to learn the lessons. In fact, perhaps those who enjoy great success are simply those who took the time to learn from their failures. Some of the greatest success stories in history come from people who failed miserably. Walt Disney was fired from the Kansas City Star because his editor felt he, quote, lacked imagination and had no good ideas, unquote. Before, of course, he went on to build businesses with ideas that reinvented American childhood. Steven Spielberg was rejected by the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts multiple times before he went on to create movies that have grossed over $9 billion. I recently was reminded of another story of someone who struggled with failure before experiencing great success. On the Win, Make, Give podcast, my friend Ben Kenny shared the story of James Dyson, the inventor of Dyson vacuum cleaners. He told the story of how James Dyson built 5,271 prototypes of a vacuum that no one wanted to buy and no one was willing to manufacture. Despite that, he never quit and has gone on to build what we know today as one of the best bagless vacuum cleaners in the world. And by the way, speaking of success, if part of your personal development involves health, wealth, leadership, and legacy, you need to do a quick search after this episode for the Win, Make, Give podcast. It's a great podcast with a great message and hosted by three awesome guys. Look, while most people will never achieve the level of success of a Walt Disney or a Steven Spielberg or a James Dyson, we can increase success in our own little world by walking away with lessons when we failed. Like every single person listening to this podcast, I've had my share of failures. When I think back on those failures, I think about what I learned. And here are some of the things I discovered failure does for us. 1, it makes us humble. Everyone I know who strives to be incredibly successful has a pretty big ego. Not only do they believe nothing in the world can hold them back, they are ready to show the world how good they are. Whether the ego is shattered by significant public failure or just damaged by everyday small failures, we get humble in a hurry. And that failure, that bring us back down to earth moment, makes us more kind-hearted. At least it should. Scripture tells us that we should clothe ourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Maybe, just maybe, our failures are intended to give us more of these traits. The second thing I found is we discover our real friends. Success draws attention. People want to be around successful people. Some because they want to learn. Some because they want to be seen with successful people. And some because they want to enjoy the ride. Failure will show us in a hurry who our real friends are. Just as people want to be around those who are seen as successful, few want to be around someone who has failed. Those who are just hanging around will bail out quickly. So if you need to purge your friends list, fail at something. Because when we are on the ground at our lowest point, the hands we see extended to lift us up are the ones that really matter. They will be the ones who will provide the inspiration to get us going again. And if we learned anything about kindness and compassion in the first point, we'll be there to do the same for them. The third thing I found is we uncover the why we were pursuing whatever it was we were trying to achieve. Look, I don't know what pushed James Dyson to keep trying after 5,271 failed prototypes of a vacuum cleaner. Did he do it because he genuinely wanted to clean the floors of homes around the world? Was the filth just disgusting him? Did he do it because he didn't want everyone to know he failed in a very public way? Did he do it because he knew he would become incredibly rich if he figured it out? Well, I have no idea. I'm certain James Dyson did. And if the same is true for us, if we truly search for the why in the middle of failure, we will determine whether it's worth it to continue. If we fail at a business venture we thought would make us a lot of money, then decide to try again because we're embarrassed that others saw our failure, then our reason for continuing is no longer about the idea of making a lot of money. It's now about our shattered ego. And at that point, we need to decide if it's worth the effort. And the fourth thing I found is it should make us turn to our faith. Whatever your faith, you should turn to it for inspiration. Every time I failed at something, I've turned to God to see if I can determine the purpose for it. And every time I've done that, I've gotten an answer. Sometimes it's not been the answer I was looking for, and sometimes it wasn't the comforting response I thought I needed. Regardless, I always got it. And sadly, for me, it was often the need for humility. Those of us who are type A personalities who are driven to succeed often need a regular reminder of our need to be humble and kind and compassionate and gentle and patient. Sometimes our failure is a way to get us back to that. I saw a great quote one time that read, "Failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of success." We can't succeed unless we learn from our failures. It's my hope that you learn from yours. All right, let's find some good stuff. I've talked on several episodes about this crazy negativity bias we all have that keeps us looking for the bad stuff when we are actually consumed by good stuff. If we're going to see it, we need to look for it. And sometimes it's easier to see when we see or hear what is happening for others. So I want to share something good happening in my life in a segment I like to call
In Search of the Good Stuff.
In the last episode of this podcast, I talked about our need to celebrate. While Tell Me Something Good gets us looking for the good around us, we need to do something with it when we find it, and that something is to celebrate it. I shared the origin of Champagne Friday, an opportunity to push aside all the crud in life, put something in a glass, raise it high, and celebrate all that is good. It's something I've been encouraging audiences to do for over a decade now. And we've scheduled a special Champagne Friday episode as part of this podcast. Each Friday, we'll spend a few minutes encouraging everyone to celebrate whatever good thing happened that week. I initially planned to call it 5-Minute Friday, and then I realized I didn't want to put a time to it. Some weeks it may be a 2-minute reminder, and others may be a 10-minute reminder as we celebrate some common good thing. So, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, do it now so you'll get a reminder every Friday morning that Champagne Friday is ready for listening. This past week I got a good question from a listener. I gave her the answer by replying to her email, and I thought I would share it here in this segment called
Ask Clint Anything. 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 Anything.
Hey Clint, appreciate the podcast. You've mentioned your own books, and I'm curious what books you like to read. Any suggestions for your listeners? That's a great question. My bookcase is full of books. In my younger years, all I read was biographies. I spent all my time reading about how others lived their life in hopes of finding suggestions on how I should live mine. Looking back, I guess I was trying to find my way and wanted to head down a path other people had shown would be successful. I don't read many biographies anymore. In fact, I stopped reading them a long time ago when I shifted my focus to areas of improvement. When I first started selling things, I read books about how to sell. When I first started leading people, I read books about how to lead people. And when I started writing books, I read books about those topics in order to do research. Based on this question, I may add a segment from time to time recommending books I've read. There are a lot of good ones out there. The one thing I never got into was novels. Reading fiction seemed like it was an enormous waste of time. If I was going to spend my time reading, I wanted specific takeaways to make me better at something. Entertainment was never my goal of reading. I'll go watch a movie if I want to be entertained. And then one day years ago, I was flying to an engagement somewhere and was watching previews on the little screen in the seat back in front of me. Most planes today have removed those screens since we now have the ability to get entertainment on our own personal devices. I sat and listened to an interview with a fiction writer named Harlan Coben. He seemed like an interesting guy, and the story he was telling in some new book he was putting out seemed interesting. After getting off the plane, I walked past one of the airport bookstores, and there was his book on a kiosk just outside the store. I was on a long trip, and I knew I would be spending a lot of time on the plane, so I thought, what the heck, I'll give it a read. The book was as big as an encyclopedia, and I figured my attention span would never allow me to get through it all. To my incredible surprise, not only did I get through that book, I have since read every book he's written, and he's written a lot. Here's why I tell you that. By reading that first fiction book, I opened my mind to do something completely different. It allowed me to escape the go of my mind and enjoy the relaxation of a journey through someone else's creative mind. As we navigate through the changes this global pandemic is making in our lives, we have no idea what we'll look like on the other side. Some people have discovered new hobbies that may grow into something bigger on the other side. Some have stopped hobbies they may never go back to on the other side. As television production has shut down and their favorite shows aren't being done, some may decide there's a better use of their time than watching the same TV shows night after night. Who knows? As it concerns your reading habits, if you have them, try something new. If you're a fiction reader, take the time to read a how-to book. If you are always focused on books that make you better at something, take the time to read a fiction book. There's so many options today as to how you can get it. You can read a physical book. You can read it on your tablet or your phone. You can listen to it on Audible. Lots of choices. I encourage you to expand your mind. And if you're looking for a suggestion, give Harlan Coben a read. He's a good writer. And if you like one book, there is a whole lot more ready if you get hooked. All right, everybody, we are about to wrap up. Before I end this episode with a challenge, I want to remind you that this episode of Tell Me Something Good has been brought to you by a brand new sponsor, Nutty Foods, a family-owned and operated company striving to provide healthier snack options, ones that are approved by moms and loved by kids. We've probably all had our fair share of snacks during the pandemic. I know I have. And we can all use some healthier options. Nutty Foods provides that healthier option. If you're looking for a good, keto-friendly snack option for you and your family, check them out at nuttyfoods.com. And now, the challenge. Before you come back for the next episode, I challenge you to think about a failure you've experienced in your life. It could be big, it could be small. Lessons are found in them all. I want you to think about your response. Did you walk away from it and refuse to try again? If so, why is that? Was your why not strong enough in the first place? Was the embarrassment of failure too much for you to risk again? Whatever it was, I want you to ask yourself two things. One, with the right support around you, those real friends we talked about, should you try again? And two, regardless of whether you try again, what lesson did you learn? Then commit to take that lesson to your next endeavor. Well, that's all for today's episode of the Tell Me Something Good podcast. I sure hope you'll join us again next week. In the meantime, be listening for that special episode of Champagne Friday. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. If you can, leave me a rating and review. Your support can help someone else as we work to spread positivity to the world. And if you have questions for the podcast, you want to share your good stuff, or you just need to find the links to join us on social media, jump over to findthegoodinlife.com. You'll find all you need right there on the front page. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'll be praying for God to bless you in mighty ways. Now, get out there and love on somebody.
You've been listening to the Tell Me Something Good podcast. The content of the podcast is meant to engage, encourage, and enlighten you to become more positive. It's not meant to diagnose, treat, or replace the personalized care provided by a trained professional. If you're struggling with depression or mental health issues, please reach out to a counselor for diagnosis and treatment. Until next time, be positive, people.